You look so pretty today.
Thank you.
So is there any outfit inspiration of your today's look?
No, not really. Just whatever was clean.
Alright. So can you first introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Louisa Rogers, and I run a vintage shop called Trendlister, and we're also online as a website.
Yeah. Do you think you have a good sense of fashion naturally, or who inspired you in your life?
I definitely got inspired by my mum to get interested in fashion. She was always dressing very differently and very creatively. So she used to take me to museums and we'd go and we'd learn a bit about fashion history.
Yeah. So what's your understanding of the vintage fashion?
In what way? So what is vintage?
Yes.
Yeah. So vintage fashion is clothing that was made between the 1970s and the 1980s. Sometimes when we talk about designer vintage, it can be more recent because designers work in specific collections. What I like about vintage is how the clothes have a story, and a lot of the time they're handmade, so the quality is a lot better as well than what you could get in, Topshop or H&M or some shop like this. So
Yes. And so the fashion trend change very quickly. How you make yourself always follow that fashion trend?
Well, I try and follow a lot of different accounts on Instagram, for example, different bloggers, but also magazines and people that I just think are really interesting and have a really unique sense of style, and then I can always see in the morning when I'm looking through. I do also like to buy magazines. It's quite old-fashioned, but I think it's really nice to have a visual way to see the trends as they happen. And what else? I guess just looking at the world around you and seeing, for example, what big museums in London have exhibitions coming, because a lot of the time when they do a big show, for example, for Yves Saint Laurent, for Frida Kahlo, that often feeds into fashion trends. So it doesn't just come from the world of fashion, it can also come from different places sometimes.
Yeah, and so do you have your fashion idol? Maybe you sometimes will follow their fashion trend.
I really like the singer Lana Del Rey, because she wears a lot of vintage clothes, and I think it's really creative because she styles them in a way that makes them look very modern and very cool, even though the clothes themselves are quite old-fashioned. So she's definitely one of my favorites.
Yeah. Now you have a fashion clothes studio. How do you source good clothing for your studio?
So I source in Europe. So I was born in Brussels. So when I go back home, I source from a lot of different places. I go to auctions, I go to private sales, and I also shop sometimes in vintage shops, even other vintage shops, and online as well. So I do a bit of sourcing online now that I'm in England, because I can't go across to Europe so often. But the clothes come from a real range of places, and I pick clothes that I find interesting or unusual, or maybe the colour really is amazing and catches my eye, or it's an interesting print. So I tend to just follow my own intuition when it comes to choosing clothes.
Yeah, so last question. Do you have any fashion tips or advice for green hand if they want to enter into the vintage fashion area?
Fashion tips. Well, what I like to do with vintage clothes is mix and match it with modern things.
Yeah.
So I would maybe wear a vintage top, but then wear it with some modern jeans from Topshop or something like that, because I don't want to look old-fashioned. I like to look on trend, so sometimes when you can blend those two elements together, then that can help. I really love that vintage clothes are very long a lot of the time, and that's a trend that's come back into fashion. So I definitely encourage people to try wearing different lengths and maybe even try wearing more traditional dresses and just sort of see how they like it. Sometimes you just need to make some small changes to the clothes to make them more modern. So a lot of the dresses I get, for example, they come to this very awkward length, which is halfway on the leg, and sometimes it's nicer just to shorten them like this. Sometimes the sleeves are really puffy and really big, and that's not so much in fashion at the moment, so we cut the sleeves off. I think it's a good thing to change the clothes to make them more wearable for people. Some people say, oh, you shouldn't touch vintage, you shouldn't change it, but I think it's a good thing to change and to kind of remix it and adapt it to today's fashion. So those would be my 3 tips.
Yes, it inspired me a lot. Thank
Good.
you very much.
Thank you.